In Chapter 4, we talked about how we assess risk, really focusing on inherent risk. In Chapter 5, we want to talk about assessing risk, but in this case, we're talking about assessing our control risk. So this video is going to go through the three-step process that is given to us on how we can assess control risk. So the first step is that we have to understand and document the internal controls of our organization. So our last video, we went through a number of different controls that management could put in place. So the first thing we have to do is understand what controls management has put into place and document that understanding. Then we come to assessing the control risk amount. So remember, our audit risk model had AR equals IR times CR times DR. So that CR piece, that control risk, what is the control risk within this organization? And we would take that with the inherent risk that we have already talked about to get our total risk of material misstatement. So what do we think is going on within this organization? What is that CR piece? And then we're going to test those controls to see if our assumption about CR is correct. So here is the diagram from your textbook. Let me zoom in here. And we see those three phases. So we have at the top, understanding, phase 2, assessment, phase 3, testing. So let's look at these in a little bit more detail. So in phase 1 or step 1, we have understanding. So obtain an understanding of internal controls. So here we have the COSO framework. We want to understand the control environment, their accounting system, their risk assessment, how they assess their own risks, what control activities or the paid tips they have in place, and how they monitor their control activities. So how do we obtain the understanding of this control environment? We typically are going to do that in one of three ways. We can either have a narrative memo where we have talked with them, we have observed what's happening, and we just write it all out in a narrative memo in words. Or we can have a questionnaire where we sit down with them, ask them a number of questions, and document their answers to those questions. Or finally, a flow chart. So I'm sure you've seen pictures or created pictures that show how a particular process takes place. Any of those three methods can be used to document that we understand what's happening within the control environment. After we understand that, the next step is to design our preliminary program of substantive procedures. So that's putting together our audit plan in the very beginning based on our preliminary understanding of internal controls. We're going to assess our control risk. So based on this understanding, how much risk do we think there is within this organization? So we have some general idea of the controls that we have, but we don't really know that they're operating the way that they're designed. That's where this testing really comes into place. So we have our assessment, and we want to know, can control risk be low or less than the maximum? So remember, the maximum means that control risk is 100%. We are 100% sure that there is some problems with their internal control, and these controls will not prevent or detect misstatements. So if we can't lower below that, where we're 100% sure there's a problem, then we would just follow this no, and we would say we assess risk at the maximum and design our audit accordingly. If we can say yes, we do think the controls are operating effectively, we think they're designed okay, then we would ask ourselves, is the reduction of control risk, so is moving that CR down, cost effective? Does it make sense to test our controls instead of just assuming control risk is at the maximum? For our PCAOB clients, this doesn't necessarily apply because we are going to have to offer an opinion, so we're going to have to test those controls. But if we're talking about ASB clients, our non-issuers, Where we can just skip control testing altogether because it's not cost effective, that's where this might come into play. Then we're going to specify the controls to be tested and perform our tests. So from this point, we have to say what we were assuming was happening with our internal controls. Is that supported or is that not supported? So if we said we think control risk is moderate, they have a moderate level of problems, but overall everything is generally okay. Do our results support that or not? If they don't support that, then we're going to have to increase the level of risk that we have. So instead of going from 50, it might have to be 75, and we would have to then adjust our audit program accordingly. So this is that risk assessment process. The last thing I want to talk about is how we actually test controls. So I had given you an acronym to help you Trick Road, to help you know all of the different tools we have in our auditing toolbox. Well, 4 of those get used specifically when we're testing controls. So we can either reperform a control. So if the control is that they have a 3-way match and they match up 3 pieces of documentation, we can reperform that, look at those 3 pieces of documentation and make sure that they all match. We could also do observation. We could watch the clerk who's responsible for matching up those 3 pieces of information actually go through and match up those 3 pieces of information. We could do inquiry. We could ask them about their process. Typically, inquiry alone is not enough, and we would want inquiry supported or supplemented by something else, but that is an option we have in our toolbox. And then finally, document inspection, looking at the documents that they have in place. So those are how we can go about testing those controls in this process. That's all for now. Check back later.